wants to bring it back. Okay. DeAngelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart, it may not be, but Antonio Gibson, Brian Robinson, and J.D. McKissick will now make up the Washington Commanders. I so wish it was Cobra Commanders. Running back by committee. Matt, what the hell are the Commanders doing?
I don't know. Maybe they're trying to do thunder, lightning, and sprinkles as their backfield. But it makes sense to a degree in realizing that last year lots of teams played cover 2. And so they dropped everything back and said, you can't throw it to win it. You're going to have to dink and dunk it or run it. And Ron Rivera, I think, being someone who, played linebacker, understands the physicality of football, had, a strong running game, whether it was Cam Newton or DeAngelo or Jonathan Stewart, wouldn't mind being able to run the ball and take some pressure off of the quarterback. And he definitely needs to take pressure off that quarterback that he has in Carson Wentz. So he's hoping that he can at least do a little bit of what the Indianapolis Colts were able to do, which is pound the ball to Jonathan Taylor, who got 1,800 yards last year. Maybe they can get 1,800 to 2,000 yards combined out of thunder, lightning, and sprinkles,
Thunder, lightning, and sprinkles. I like that, Bloom. But our friend John Keim, who I believe is an Audible alum, he reported that Antonio Gibson's usage each week may vary.
Right.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you the same thing I asked Matt. What the hell are the Commanders thinking?
Yeah, I think what they're thinking is that they don't love Antonio Gibson as a 25 touch a game back. They don't like him necessarily as a short yardage back, and they don't like that wasn't really healthy at all last year. Like there was no point last year that he was completely healthy. So we can extrapolate this stuff, and we can go with the very negative end. And I think you'll see people cover it like this and say it's a message to Antonio Gibson. Well, for a player who barely was a running back at Memphis, what he's done for the team has been a success. He's been a successful 4th-round pick by any measure. So I don't think that we should view this through an extremely negative lens. And for fantasy, if it becomes too negative, Gibson and Keim said, and Keim is one of those guys. See, I think we could make a list of like 20, 25, 30 beat writers that say if they say something, it carries extra weight. He's been covering the team. When you say he's an Audible alum, Cease, that means he was on the show like 13 or 14 years ago, 15 years ago. So he's been covering the team for a long time. And he said that Gibson's still going to lead the team in touches. He's still going to be the lead running back in that sense. But when you say his usage could vary week to week, almost what I read out of that is when Washington's having a successful game and they can run the ball 30 or 35 times, then Brian Robinson's going to get like 10 or 12 of those, maybe 15. Maybe in the second half, if he's the hot hand, he's going to be the guy to put the lean on the defense. Now we can say, how often is that going to happen? Alternatively, over Indy OTAs, Nyheim Hines. You guys know I'm never going to give up on my scat backs. Stephen Holder, who I really like. Stephen Holder said, he said it was a Matt Ryan appreciation tweet, but he said, wow, the ball's coming out on time. This is a timing offense. The ball's hitting the receivers as they come out of their breaks. That's a Carson Wentz shade tweet. That's not a Matt Ryan appreciation tweet. So when you add that into the Washington offense, how many games are they going to really control? We saw their defense really fall apart last year, even before Chase Young got hurt. So they are still relying on the pass rush and the front end of the defense to mask problems in the back end of the defense. William Jackson wasn't as good as they hoped he was going to be as a free agent, et cetera. So the other thing that's probably most troubling from the John Keim article is he said, if Brian Robinson keeps Antonio Gibson fresh and takes short yardage, then he will have justified the 3rd-round pick. So for fantasy, that matters.
But Brian Robinson will probably get overdrafted in fantasy due to the underwhelming nature of Antonio Gibson and that whole, fantasy pulley system that fans have in their minds. But Ron Rivera talked about him as the closeout back, as you mentioned very well. And as Cecil asked, how often is that really going to happen with Carson Wentz not going to be able to hit sprinkles J.D. McKissick out into the backfield the way, because everybody's going to picture him like Nyheim Hines, and then you have that whole backfield's going to be a disappointment, I think, relative to ADP.
Yeah, and what's sad for me, guys, and Bloom, I'll toss it back to you super quick. It's just an avoid situation. Like, I love Gibson. There's some talent with sprinkles as well. But like it's such a mess. I'm just like, well, I guess I'm not going to get one of my favorite backs this year, Antonio Gibson.
Yeah, and I think that again, if he falls to the 6th round of drafts, okay, what meaningful players are you passing on? Because there's always the possibility. Let's go back in time to, and it wasn't necessarily when Ron Rivera was calling the shots, but whenever the Panthers drafted Jonathan Stewart, I think was at that draft. It was like the death knell of DeAngelo Williams' value, right? What happened to DeAngelo Williams that year?
He's like a 1,500-yard rusher.
He had a career year. So also in that same article, Keim reported that Gibson's went from 18% to 12% body fat working with Chef, et cetera, et cetera. So it's in flux, but I think avoid in drafts, but be ready to act if we see that it lights a fire under Gibson. If we see that Robinson just fits the ethos of the team better and maybe he surpasses Gibson, McKissick sprinkles. Can we call him something like Gale Force Winds or something like that? Come on. I mean, he's drizzle sprinkles. We're underestimating his impact. And speaking of that, it makes me think of butterfly wings. And what if the Bills had what if McKissick had gone to the Bills? They wouldn't have James Cook. Also, maybe the Steelers wouldn't have Levi Wallace. Lots of different things here as we piece together all these offseason moves.
Who doesn't like sprinkles, Bloom?
Oh, actually, you asked me, so I'm going to do it. So there might be one person listening that watches the Spring Baking Championship. There's a wonderful baker, a French baker, Romy, who was just outclassing the whole competition. But the woman that was hosting it loves sprinkles. She's from Minnesota, and she liked things like ice cream. It was like cookie salad, like all of these things. They're having these master bakers do things like, I said master baker, doing these things.
Joe.
Sorry, Joe. I saw the Sorry Joe show.
Gale Force Winds.
Yeah, right. And they had something in the final episode where the bottom two had to compete against each other to stay in the final episode, which they've never done before. And she said, well, you're going to have to make something with my favorite thing, sprinkles. And the French baker said, I do not want to play with sprinkles. And he just walked off the set and left. Romy, you're the man.
Drop the mic.
Romy doesn't like sprinkles. Controversy in the baking championship world.
Hot baking talk, and not of the baking talk we usually talk about. And I don't think I've quoted Half Baked yet in this show. So, God, if you're listening, help. Matt Waldman, it only took 8 minutes for this to turn into a Broncos show, but I'm out at OTAs. I'm out at Broncos minicamp. There have been 2 full open practices with team drills. A lot of the other stuff that's been open to the media has been like warm-ups and some one-on-ones and stuff. So it's exciting to see Russell Wilson. But I'm here to tell everyone and to be the leader of this. Russell Wilson's favorite target is Courtland Sutton. Now, Timmy Patrick is doing his thing, right? And that's cool. And Judy's, I don't think I'm at liberty to say what exactly is going on with Judy. But he was out of practice. It doesn't have anything to do with the off-field stuff that he got in trouble for. But it's an injury situation. And because they don't have to designate injury stuff, I don't think I should say what it is. It's nothing big. It's nothing major and nothing in the lower body, anything like that. So nobody worry about it, okay? But I'm not going to say it because it hasn't been reported, and I'm not going to be the one to report it because off-season injuries are weird stuff. James Washington's in a walking boot, and they're like, I don't know. Anyway, it's a Sutton show. Like, legit Sutton. It's 2 people. It's Sutton and it's Dulcich. So, Matt, when I tell you about this, and we're talking OTA news with fantasy implications, Courtland Sutton is Russell Wilson's favorite target. And by the way, remember Peyton Manning and the hand gyrations that he did all the time at the line of scrimmage? Russ does the same thing, except they're very subtle. They're very subtle, and you have to kind of know what they mean. But these receivers, and in talking to these receivers, including Courtland, they're all getting on the same page with him. Him and Sutton are already there, man. They're already there. And I wouldn't report this if I hadn't seen it, obviously, and really believed that the early favorite to be Russell Wilson's favorite is one Courtland Sutton. And they're going to let Russ cook. There is... Again, you can't reveal too much, but let's just say I would say there's a lot of pre-snap motion. There's a lot of Russ using his legs to keep plays alive, design rollouts and bootlegs, etc. That's what I would say. If I were to design the offense, I'm not telling you what I've seen. I'm just telling you what I would do, Matt Lassie Bark. So when I say these things, what does it say for you in your fantasy drafts?
Well, I think it just validates what we all probably pretty much expect when you take a superstar quarterback and you put him on a team that's worth a damn. And that's basically what happens when you took Tom Brady and put him on the Buccaneers, or you took Peyton Manning and put him back in Denver, or, any of these types of scenarios. And within a year or two, either this year or next, Russell Wilson is going to have career highs in passing yardage, yards per attempt, and touchdowns. That it's going to happen most likely with this team. Like right now, I have Russell Wilson projected about 4,500 yards and a very healthy, well over 8 yards per attempt. It's probably going to drop a little bit as I get into the season, but I have him at 34 touchdowns. I have Courtland Sutton as the leader on that team easily, because Jerry Jeudy is as good as he is. There's still that residual desire of people to equate him to Antonio Brown, and someday it's going to happen because they drafted him high in their fantasy leagues, or they stated him as such when they did their pre-draft proposal. He is Reggie Wayne. Okay, nothing bad about Reggie Wayne, but there's a big difference between Antonio Brown and Reggie Wayne in terms of how they're used. So for me, Courtland Sutton is more of a guy who's going to lead in targets, probably between 118 to 130. You're probably going to see him at around 85 to 90 catches, probably 1,200 to 1,300 yards, depending on how the season goes, and somewhere between 9 to 12 touchdowns out of him, as long as he stays healthy. And he's a full year back from his knee surgery. Probably looks good. And Jeudy, to me, Jeudy might get to 100 targets. But that means probably 65 to 75 receptions and 800 to 900 yards, which isn't bad. And maybe it can be a lot better, but I think Tim Patrick is that sturdy kind of utility guy who Russell Wilson's going to be able to lean on for all those nice little corner routes and sail concepts and seam routes that Jeudy is just not going to get open on. And that Patrick has the advantage with his height. And then you get, so when I look at those three in general, I think those are your three leaders. KJ Hamler, obviously, everyone looks at him and goes, ooh, maybe he can be Doug Baldwin or Tyler Lockett or all these things. Well, there's some talent there, I'm sure, as you can attest, Cecil, but is that really going to be part of the plan? I don't think it's a part of a plan unless one or two guys get hurt. And then, even then, is he going to be able to get that going? What I want to ask you, Cecil, is how about Albert O? Because obviously before Dulcich was added, this looked kind of exciting for Big O, and I'm still optimistic about him, because as we know, especially I joke with Denver tight ends in general, but really tight ends overall, it very rarely do we get a Kyle Pitts or a Pat Freiermuth. Do you see Dulcich really being a Pat Freiermuth or situation this year, or do you think?
I think Freiermuth might be a little much, just because there are two guys there. I think O could be the guy in the red zone, but I will say this again. I'm just saying what I would do. I'm not saying what they've done.
Right.
There's specific plays for Dulcich that you don't see for O.
Right.
Like O is out there doing traditional tight end stuff, and then Dulcich is in, and I would run specific plays for him down the seam.
Let me ask you this. I always saw Noah Fant as kind of the schemed up player. Like, they do lots of things to get him open, but when it came to a one-on-one matchup where it was like you got to beat somebody, it was Albert O that was better at that than Fant. Is Dulcich in your opinion, more of a matchup player or a schemed up player?
He's a matchup player, in my opinion. Yeah, okay. And it's that speed really that makes him special. So a lot of things to watch with this Broncos offense, and a lot of excitement around Russell Wilson going to cook Sigmund Bloom.
Yeah.
Sutton's his favorite. And I left somebody out specifically for you, because you hear a lot of things. And, I said something on Twitter that got people riled up. I was like, hey, Seattle, you're dumb for getting rid of Russell Wilson. Like, I'm sorry. That's just dumb. I'm sorry. It's my opinion. People are like,
Mhm.
you hate Twitter and hot takes. Like, I don't think that's a hot take. I think he could be an MVP. He could be a league MVP in this offense because they're just letting him do it. He's running everything. So he's old and he didn't look as good and he holds on to the ball too long. Okay, those were Seattle things. I'm telling you, Denver things look different. And one thing that he's doing, Bloom, this is what I say for you. He's also peppering running backs. One specifically, Javonte Williams. Now, Melvin Gordon, it was his dream to play with Russell Wilson, and then he doesn't show up to voluntary OTAs. So I'm like, you keep dreaming, buddy. Anyway, he'll fumble a game away.
Don't wake him up.
Exactly. But so Dulcich, Sutton, Javonte out of the backfield. These seem to be emphasized by the Broncos offense, or at least that's what I would do, Bloom.
Yeah, I think that the background of this conversation is what's important. And as we are in May, June, Matt's talking about projections. I'm going to be getting my projections out soon. We're thinking about these offenses as a whole. And what we need to consider here, as Matt was alluding to, is what will Russell Wilson look like? What will his stats look like? What will his efficiency, his production look like in an offense where he's not swimming upstream against the philosophy of the team? And this is where the insight we get from UCs. And I seem to remember there was a sea change in the philosophy of the Broncos once. And one radio personality fantasy analyst was able to give us the drop on these types of things if people aren't remembering. Julius Thomas, for instance. So let's listen. You're E.F. Hutton on this stuff, Cecil, because and I had a little back and forth. I love the back and forths on Twitter. I still like Twitter. And someone brought up some good points about Nathaniel Hackett coming from under Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur's pace, Matt LaFleur's run pass splits, not that different from Seattle. Matt LaFleur's philosophy, honestly, maybe not that different from Seattle in the sense of considering the run the foundation of the offense. However, I don't know if that's what Nathaniel Hackett is going to do. And I certainly think based on what you're saying, based on what makes sense, and hey, assumption of rational coaching, it would be to give Russell Wilson more freedom, or at least make Russell Wilson's skills the centerpiece of the offense, or that's what you do to put the defense off balance first, especially when you have all this talent. Again, the theory we've been talking about for years, Cease, that they assembled all these pieces and they were just waiting for the quarterback, and they got the quarterback. So whether it's Sutton, whether it's Javonte Williams, and with Javonte Williams, his ADP still hasn't fallen that much. I mean, before Melvin Gordon re-signed, he might have had his top 5 ADP in some circles. And I still think you're probably going to take him in the first round or at least the early second round, which is more of a ceiling projection for him. But if this offense is highly productive, he can hit that ceiling projection even with Melvin Gordon in tow. So I think that what you're saying, Cease, to cut to the chase of what you presented to me is, yes, Javonte Williams can still outproduce his ADP. That small tick down after Melvin Gordon was re-signed. But the bigger thing is, folks, when we see a change, whether it's coaching, whether it's a big personnel change, or both in this case, for the Broncos, we need to reckon with things aren't going to look the way they did before. Things aren't going to look the way they did before with Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson is the 9th, 10th, 11th quarterback off the board this year. Whoa. Because he's usually a top 5 or 6 quarterback, even with the environmental factors he was working against in Seattle. Then you add in what you're reporting, Cease, which is chemistry developing between him and Sutton. Everybody, I think, good vibes. Would you say that, Cease? Good vibes.
Positive energy everywhere. Yes.
Positive energy. So get some of that positive energy. It's very likely that this offense is going to create multiple overachievers for fantasy football. And you can be in early. I know there's all the big underdog, best ball contests and things like that. Get yourself some Broncos.
All right. It is the Audible Live. And, well, Matt, we're going to go down to where Sigmund's at. We should literally do that, man.
Yes, you should. Everyone should.
Road trip.
Come on
right?
down.
Okay. We're going to go to New Orleans because Jameis Winston's already on the field. He's a limited participant, but Jameis Winston is out there, man. And if we look back at last year, Matt, we take in what Jameis Winston looked like before the injury to his knee on Halloween. And then consider now with Jarvis Landry and Chris Olave. You guys talked about Landry last week, but the Winston news, not necessarily shocking, but it is very good news to see him back out there, even limited in Saints OTAs, Matt.
It absolutely is. And, Winston is still an up and down player, but there were moments where you saw early in the season that he had really worked on some of the technical aspects of his game. His footwork was a far steadier. His drop rates were a little bit better so that he could set up and move from there and not throw some of the wild balls that he would often throw in Tampa. So maybe year two, while dealing with an injury, that may have cut short some of the work that he's been able to do to continue to refine some of the things that he learned, a year ago during the offseason. I still think that he is good enough, even at his worst, to support 3 to 4 fantasy valuable receiving players, passing game contributors. And that's what you have in this offense. I mean, really, the biggest problem with this offense is that Tre'Quan Smith is a limited route runner. Marquez Callaway was a limited route runner. Deontay Harris, little Jordan Humphrey. I mean, this sounds more like a revival band of guys who never really made it on in general, but were on small labels that never really worked out. But now you bring in guys like Jarvis Landry and Michael Thomas and Chris Olave, and you give it just makes these other guys who were smaller pieces more valuable in the contributions that they can make. So between him and if Andy Dalton is still around by the end of camp, and I imagine that he will be, Andy Dalton supported 3 viable fantasy players in his heyday in AJ Green and Marvin Jones and either Brandon LaFell or whoever else you want to put in there, Tyler Eifert, you can mention them. And he did it for 3 or 4 years. Jameis Winston did it for 3 or 4 years. I don't think it's out of this question to think that you're going to be able to get decent value out of all 3 of the Saints receivers this year with Jameis Winston. And he'll be a good, quarterback by committee selection who might end up being your lead quarterback as the season goes along if he has a good year.
All right, Sig. Again, you guys recapped the Landry stuff last week, but we got the news about Jameis Winston. I felt it was worth revisiting because there's certainly fantasy value there.
Yeah, and if we're going to look for meaningful information out of OTAs, getting some sort of hard information about where players are in their injury recovery is actionable information in OTAs, and this is absolutely one. And it is good news, not necessarily unexpected, because Jameis Winston is not necessarily a quarterback who relies on mobility, and it doesn't seem like an ACL tear would be as impactful for him as it would be for other quarterbacks. So it's good to see him back, and he's the right quarterback for this team at this time. When we look at the Saints in general, though, again, you have maybe an insignificant change, maybe a significant change with Sean Payton not in the building anymore. Now, you might say it's not going to change at all offensively because Carmichael's still there. Well, what we saw last year was a highly efficient Jameis Winston with low pass attempts, and that's without Michael Thomas, without Jarvis Landry, without Chris Olave. So you would think he can maintain high efficiency and maybe even be more productive than he was. He was a little bit up and down for fantasy. Certainly in Superflex leagues, he was still more than relevant. He wasn't necessarily a breakout quarterback, but he was playing a lot better. And I think that's the reason he went to New Orleans and the reason he stayed in New Orleans, even though he wasn't getting paid very much at first when he was in New Orleans. Now he's getting paid like a very low-level starter, which is still double-digit millions, right? The biggest question, though, guys, is what's going to happen with Alvin Kamara. And I feel like we should bring in Drew Davenport, put him in the top here, because there's a big question about Alvin Kamara's legal situation. And it goes beyond whether the league's going to hand down a suspension before the season. And he's facing felony charges. And allegedly there's a video. And if there's a video, the NFL is going to have their hands on it. So yes, Jameis Winston can support the fantasy values of Olave, Landry, and Thomas. And by the way, Thomas, I still think I want to see him out on the practice field. Speaking of hard information about injury recovery, he's not 100% yet from that ankle. So now we're going on 2 years that ankle has been an issue for him. Maybe a third year. I want to see him out there and looking like the old Michael Thomas before. And remember, the organization and Michael Thomas weren't necessarily on great terms either. Does Sean Payton moving on help rehabilitate that situation as far as the vibrations there, the good feelings there? But if Alvin Kamara is back and doesn't miss any time this year, then how does this fit together? How do these pieces fit together? Mark Ingram's still there. Of course, we got Abram Smith, the converted linebacker that we're all watching among the undrafted free agents. So there's a lot of questions right now. But see, the other thing is I'll toss back to you because you've been in the building with Dennis Allen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not positive things. If you listen to what people say from his coaching stint with Raiders, not positive vibes. So that could be something that no matter how good we think the Saints offense can be, Dennis Allen, he lives down to expectations from his time coaching the Raiders, well, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see how that responds. And by the way, the video of Kamara, it's Vegas. There's video of everything everywhere. So there you go. It is the Audible Live as we go through OTA's news and notes, and there's actually quite a bit. That's why you subscribe to our Football Guys daily newsletter. Go to footballguys.com right now. Sign up. It's free, and it's our views written by me, Sigmund Bloom, and the fantabulous Joe Bryant. So check it out at footballguys.com. You'll get all that news hot and fresh to your inbox every single morning, the fantasy relevant news that we bring you at footballguys.com. So going over our newswire, I did bring it up earlier. I teased it. That is an industry term, Matt. But the James Washington thing in a boot, people like, oh, that's not a big deal, whatever. Michael Gallup had what, a week 17 ACL? Right? And Washington can play. Maybe he's not quite Chris Chambers. It's who I think I compared him to when he came out of Oklahoma State because of the long arms and the downfield tracking, all those types of things. But this Cowboys receiver situation, we can just talk Cowboys weapons in general, but it's something to monitor when you have the reports of Washington in a boot. He's fine. He's on track for mini camp. Okay, that's fine. That's, whatever. Jaylen Tolbert is on the sidelines. So they've got some wide receiver issues that normally, most people just kind of gloss over. Maybe they shouldn't, Matt.
No, they probably shouldn't, even if these guys are healthy, because James Washington, as you described perfectly there in terms of what he does well, what he doesn't do well is run routes well. And that's why he's out of Pittsburgh, because he's an all-star at the catch point, and he's barely on the roster as a wide receiver running routes. I mean, that's kind of the caliber of skills he's got. So you're looking at a guy, when you think of that from fantasy, he's going to be, if he's high target player, if he catches 50% of his targets, he's doing well. That's not a good number for a wide receiver. So you combine that with Gallup probably having a slow start. Washington, if Washington is second on the wide receiving core with targets this year, that's bad news for Dak Prescott. Okay. So, and I'm projecting that right now because Tolbert's still going to be getting up to speed. He's a guy who should get better as a route runner and better overall. But again, his career, just like most rookies, could short circuit and turn into a James Washington situation where he's a great tracker, great athlete, but isn't a complete receiver. And then back behind that, I mean, CeeDee Lamb's gonna look good, but you have guys like Simi Fehoko, who is basically, if I was going to logo scout any team, it would be Stanford tight ends and wide receivers who are basically the same thing, unless you're a slot guy. There's lots of Stanford slot guys who will man special teams for you and have at least 5 to 8 jobs throughout a 10-year career in the league that you've never heard of or forget about, like Trent Irwin and Connor Weddington, who are all interesting in that respect. But then the rest of them are these guys who test really well, but their film doesn't really stack up to their testing. And Fehoko is kind of that guy that we're waiting for, just like the Arcega-Whiteside and all of those characters. Noah, and then the rest of their guys are special teamers. Noah Brown's a special teamer out of Ohio State who makes great catches, but he's not explosive. One of my favorites is Brandon Smith out of Iowa, who's a fantastic special teams guy, but at his best, he would have to probably get that special training to become Keenan McCardle as a player. And so there, TJ Vasher's interesting, and he'll give you that shiny, that bright and shiny toy vibe that a Hunter, or who was that kid that the Steelers or the Titans had, Hunter out of Tennessee,
Justin Hunter,
Yeah, like a Randy Moss starter kit, but without the extra batteries, that you need. Maybe Vasher can extend beyond that. I think he could be a little better. But so that puts us in this scenario. You're going to have you're going to be leaning a lot on your backs, the short passes to your backs, CeeDee Lamb, and then your tight ends. Your best receivers after CeeDee Lamb might be Dalton Schultz and Jake Ferguson, who's having a decent, impression early on. And yeah, well, the backs, we mentioned them. So, but certainly those are guys that you might be looking at. Dallas might be going 2 tight ends on a regular basis, especially because their line isn't what it used to be. So they may need to be able to have, a little bit more support blocking so that they can run the ball and use play action and get Dak Prescott outside the pocket a little bit. So this team may have to go towards that. And if that's the case, Prescott's been a relative deal for a few years. Teams, there are a lot of fantasy players are a year or two behind him. Now I think this is that point where you might need to fade him a little bit or wait for him to become a value, as opposed to expecting a 5,000 year out of him. Now you're just hoping that he can get over 4,000.
Bloom, it sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah, well, look, this is a Cowboys offense that in recent years, they've got the offensive line, they've got the backs, they've got the receivers, and Dalton Schultz, who I was so skeptical about, I think he has produced because he's the if Dalton Schultz is going to beat us, then Dalton Schultz is going to beat us, right? You're accounting for Amari Cooper, you're accounting for CeeDee Lamb, you're accounting for Elliott and Pollard. Okay, Schultz is going to beat us, and Prescott really zeroed in on him. Now, Schultz, I think the targets will be there in terms of volume, but will the production be there in an offense that is much easier to defend without Amari Cooper, without Cedric Wilson, who really came on to do some things last year and got a pretty good contract, like $6-7 million a year from Miami. And then, like you said, like you led off with, who's the number 2 receiver? So we do have a few things to sort through here from Dak Prescott. One is that he said that the team specifically asked him about Holbert, and he endorsed him. So that's something to just follow. The locker room narrative. I don't know if CeeDee Lamb asked for his locker to be moved next to Dak, or Dak. I maybe think Dak asked for CeeDee Lamb to be put next to him. And CeeDee Lamb grew a half an inch and put on 10 pounds muscle, whatever. But could we see a kind of relationship on the field that was like Allen to Diggs the first year in Buffalo, where CeeDee Lamb could lead the league in targets. And if CeeDee Lamb's leading league in targets, he may well be the number 1 overall receiver, because as we're discussing in the chat room, now Cooper Kupp is going to have Allen Robinson. I think Odell Beckham is going to end up back with the Rams. They've got Van Jefferson, Tutu Atwell. So, maybe Cooper Kupp doesn't have to take on as much of that offense as he did last year. My point is, CeeDee Lamb has that unknown upside for a 2nd round pick, but this team's going to have to shrug off the not very efficient deployment of what they have, right? It's like the ghost of Jason Garrett is still in the building, right? It feels
He's
like
driving that cart from the Super 70s Sport tweet that was empty and running over people at Cowboys Stadium.
Exactly. That was Marshawn Lynch. No, the point is that this offense is going to shrink, right? The pie of this offense is going to shrink. I don't trust this offensive coaching staff to be rational. I don't trust Dak Prescott to be a resourceful quarterback, a la Russell Wilson. Like Russell Wilson had to swim upstream and still made the most out of it. I don't know that Dak Prescott's that kind of quarterback. I think we saw, especially in the playoff loss, that he is a bit robotic. He is a bit stuck in his way of approaching defenses. And when you have the personnel advantages, that works. What happens when you don't have the personnel advantages? I do think that if we're assuming rational coaching, the answer is Tony Pollard. Bob Sturm, who's one of the respectable voices on the Cowboys beat, said, he writes for The Athletic, said, basically, in a nutshell, nobody understands why they don't use Tony Pollard more. Morale because of Ezekiel Elliott's contract. Tony Pollard's Jerry. That's the answer, right? Tony Pollard should be the answer here, but I don't trust it will be the answer. Now, if you want to flip this inside out, there is the take that Ezekiel Elliott wasn't the same after his knee injury last year. He played with it all year. And if he can just avoid an injury this year, we'll see a return to the old Zeke. But as Matt said, the offensive line isn't the same offensive line anymore. Still, maybe Zeke is the guy you get on the rebound here. My point is, I've got a lot of questions. I've got a lot of concerns. And I look at the quarterback, no disrespect to Dak Prescott. I look at the coaches. I think if you we could look at CD Lamb as a player prime for takeoff with 200 targets this year. We can also look at CD Lamb as a player that defenses can go in and say, as long as we take away CD Lamb, this offense is pretty basic. There it is. Was that after a high school game?
I don't know. I think this could be a metaphor for a lot of things going on in our world today. So,
Someone needs to set up the Twitter account for the golf
or just
cart.
the Cowboys in general. It could just be
Jason
that.
Garrett, ghost of Jason Garrett driving. Like, there you go.
I mean, he's going to show you. Jerry's going to show you the draft pick chart on day. At the end of day 2.
Of course.
Yeah. What's the password? What's the password?
It's always the same. Jerry 1 2 3 4. Anyway,
works for me.
It is the Audible. Bloom, I'm going to give away a secret today.
Okay.
I can always tell because maybe I shouldn't give away this secret, but we don't ever discuss what we're going to talk about. We just jump in and start talking. And so when I bring up some topics, and I can tell, you're commenting in the chat room, you're checking Twitter or whatever.
Yeah.
But when I bring up topics that like you just can't wait to jump in on, you can barely contain yourself.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excitable.
He's excitable, that's for sure. All right. It is the Audible Live. We're going to wrap things up with some hot Tua Tagovailoa talk, Matt. He's impressing. Now he's missing practice also, by the way. So, look out for that. But it was an illness, and the new staff has been impressed. This is from Adam Beasley from Pro Football Network. What have I seen from Tagovailoa? I've seen a guy that's attacking the moment, a guy that really likes to play football. I've been very excited about his development as far as the offensive plan and being the starting quarterback for the Miami Dolphins. That's from my buddy Mike McDaniel. Okay. We had some Jaylen Waddle discussion in the chat room. We know there's Tyreek Hill there. We know that they've got talent. Do they have the right fit? Or do the Dolphins receivers remind you of the Broncos receivers when they were catching passes from Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater?
Well, the quote from the great Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until you hit him in the mouth. So that's essentially what I heard when you read that Mike McDaniel quote. Everything's going as planned right now. And I would hope so, because no one's getting hit. Nothing's really, there's nothing meaningful here in terms of what separates Tua Tagovailoa from Joe Burrow, from Russell Wilson, from any of these guys at the top of the board for your quarterbacking is what happens on the field right now. We can talk about all the plans and talk about all the intentions, and that's valuable when we're talking about new players or major changes to an offensive system that may emphasize one player more than another. But we know that Tua Tagovailoa is on paper the guy this year. Teddy Bridgewater is the bridge in case all disaster hits, and they need to just continue to guide this team to be competitive. And Skylar Thompson is the only guy that they picked, who this new regime actually picked or drafted, who is actually also looking fairly good in camp and making some layered throws and doing some things that I would, if I were you, I would keep an eye on him as that possibility if there's disaster. And I would even say I wouldn't be surprised if they keep him as their third quarterback and we see an extreme version of a Davis Mills situation if Tua Tagovailoa falters. But I like Tagovailoa enough to think that really the whole thing that we're going to be looking at here is whether or not he's going to be able to hit those receivers downfield. Is he going to have enough time? Is the offense going to be able to run the ball well enough to give him the opportunity to deliver that ball with accuracy and good timing and good choices? And if he does that, he's going to be a low-end quarterback one at the very least, and he's going to be their starter for the next 3 to 4 years. If that doesn't happen, they don't feel like he's efficient enough, that he makes big mistakes in the moments where he, if he early career Kirk Cousins out in like Washington, if he does that in Miami, he's out of here. If not, then they've got that chance. And you look at the talent. I mean, it's fantastic. Jaylen Waddle playing the Jarvis Landry role last year was like basically taking a Ferrari and asking it to tow, like,
boat.
to tow your boat. Exactly. And he did it just fine, which was like unbelievable. He had the most underrated rookie season that I've seen from a player. And honestly, I wouldn't put him that far away from Jamar Chase as a talent. And so if they give, now with Tyreek Hill commanding what he does, to me, I look at this, if I'm Tua, I'm thinking I better be hitting Jaylen Waddle for like one-on-one passes for like 80, 90 yards at least once or twice this year, and be getting like 40, 50-yard gains out of him at least every other game for the first 8 games before the opposing defenses clamp down, or else I'm going to be out of here, because it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that they have 2 guys like that, plus Gesicki, who, now he should be running free, and he'll make all the Penn State people happy who compared him to something that he's never been. But like, he'll be good enough because no one's going to be able to cover him. So I mean, he'll be what Pat Freiermuth is right now. So
there you have it.
Ooh, I love it.
Sig, let's do like our friend BK says and tie a bow on today's show with some Dolphins talk.
Yeah, I'd like when Matt says Penn State people, because I grew up a Pitt Penn State was a blood feud rivalry when I was a kid, and as the mascot at Carmelo's bar, all the bar flies would say, "Whose side are you on?" I'd say Pitt, and they'd be like half. Ooh,
and then we got Chase Stewart in his polo shirt being the Penn State guy, right?
Yeah, I could talk about an experience I had at the Bryce Jordan Center at a fish show that I won't, because we're going to talk Dolphins. Dolphins. Okay, so on one side you've got Mike McDaniel, right? This is a team. How many offensive coordinators? The Dolphins somehow have had 6 offensive coordinators in the last 5 years, and not because they fired somebody mid-season and put in an interim. That's how much instability there has been in this offense. None of them have been good, or else there wouldn't be 6 in 5 years. Mike McDaniel should make this offense more efficient. They sign Teron Armstead. They signed Connor Williams, left side of the line, totally rebuilt. They've been throwing all these picks to the offensive line for backups, I guess. Well, maybe Robert Hunt's going to work out. So you're rebuilding the offensive line. You bring in Tyreek Hill. No excuses, right? There's no excuses. Now, first year install, maybe there can be some hiccups. Maybe it's one of those things where the second half of the year, the offense comes together. The first half of the year, they're still working out the kinks. But it should be a lot better offense. It should be a lot more efficient. And there's no excuses for Tua Tagovailoa this year. No excuses. So I think that's really the bottom line in football terms. In fantasy terms, I think we might get a little ahead of ourselves with Tua, because what do we remember about Mike McDaniel's offense in San Francisco? When things are going well, how many times did Jimmy Garoppolo throw the ball? 15? 17.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle can be good enough that they're still in your lineup, and some weeks it's 4 for 40, some weeks it's 4 for 140 and a touchdown. You'll take that. But I'm seeing Hill and Waddle 3-4 rounds apart. No. I know that I'm not saying Waddle's the player that Hill is, but in terms of the coverages they're going to see, in terms of the focus of the defense, Waddle, as Matt was saying, he's the one more likely to get those 80, 90-yard touchdowns than Hill. So I think from a fantasy perspective, the takeaway here is going to be that you want to target Waddle ADP and fade Hill ADP, because I would hope, again, rational coaching, that their roles and their volume will be somewhat similar, interchangeable even. And I think that Hill will get a lot more attention. The other thing that's going to be intriguing is the backfield. Raheem Mostert can't stay healthy. Chase Edmonds not really between the tackles back. Same thing, Myles Gaskin might not be on the roster. Salvin Ahmed might be on not even the roster. I like Quan White. I love the way you described him in the RSP. Get your RSP if you haven't, folks. So Quan White is an interesting undrafted free agent to watch, just because he's got juice. We'll see if they can, get some harness on that juice. But it all comes back to Sony Michel. And I don't remember the exact amount he got on his contract, guaranteed. I think it was enough to say he's going to make the team. It was enough that he wasn't just brought in on a veteran minimum contract, and let's see if he's got anything to help the team. He's not a very nuanced runner, but he is a runner that can make a good running game work, right? So Sony Michel is the other piece that I'm going to be watching here, because if Mike McDaniel, if the changes on the offensive line can revitalize this running game, which has been almost non-existent at times last year, this is going to be an offense where the run sets up the pass, even though they made such a big investment in Tyreek Hill this offseason and Jaylen Waddle last year.
It is the Audible Live. Bloom, I'm going to do an experiment with you. Okay. So this is all natural. We haven't rehearsed this. Matt told you earlier about seeing Steely Dan, right?
Yeah.
And you're like super excited. Well, I am going to see tonight Limp Bizkit.
Oh, well, the thing about Limp Bizkit, true or false, Limp Bizkit is like dad rock now.
Yeah, true.
It's like in the 2022 world, Limp Bizkit is dad rock.
Yeah. I go to my dentist's office, which I maybe should go a little bit more. And you hear Limp Bizkit playing, so get your gas mask and some nookie.
Are you going to go to the what do they call it? The Gathering of the Juggalos?
That's ICP. That's not Limp Bizkit.
Yeah, it's close enough. They're like cousins on the family tree, right?
Those are like your cousins. Those are your play cousins. You know why? Are those guys going to be here? Oh God, we got some. What's the root beer they spray on everybody? Fago, right? Like,
yeah, it's Michigan, man.
I got a buddy that went there, and he's like, "It's so fun." I'm like, "That's cool."
It's one of the closest related things in the music universe to a fish show. Believe it or not, Juggalos, fish heads.
Do they make
their cousins?
Do they make that root beer out of the water from Flint?
No.
Okay.
Get up to the Upper Peninsula.
Okay. The UP. There we go.
All right, there we have it. Let's wrap up this show with a reminder to check out footballguys.com. Red hat to the back like Fred Durst. And just thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a vid. It's completely off the rails. This is like hour 2 back in the day.
Yeah.
So we thank everyone for watching. We also know that starting June 1st, all of our individual podcasts on Football Guys will be on their own streams. So if you've loved the Dynasty show and, the Dynasty newsletter show and mailbag and newsletter and everything that we've got going on, well, they will have their own individual podcast streams from the audio side. Video side, you're good. You're watching us on YouTube. You're doing all the things. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bells, never miss a vid. Watch all the way to the end. Thank you. But if you listen audio-wise, and you're like, wait a second, I haven't heard Chad and Jordan in a while. Well, they have their own podcast stream now. So make sure to, look for that, search for that wherever you get your podcast. We'll be tweeting about it as well. But that starts on June 1st. So we're giving everyone their own stream here on Football Guys. And we'll be here with you doing our thing on Football Guys. He's Sigmund Bloom. He's officially awesome. He's Matt Waldman. He's the Incredible Hulk.
Don't let the streams cross.
Yeah.
Don't cross streams. And I am Cecil Lammey saying thanks, everyone. Stay tuned. And as always, stay frosty.
I did it all.